So today we are going to talk about a new strategy for how we're going to read poetry. So this is called the Big Six. It is a reading strategy for poetry wherein we look at the title, the speaker, the theme, the tools, the turns, and finally, paraphrase. Sorry, there's this little thing there, but it's okay. And before we start talking about the Big Six and what the Big Six is, I want to take a second and reframe our mindset when it comes to poetry. Because I've noticed, not only in my classroom, but just out in the world, that people in general are not a fan of poetry. We're kind of scared of it. We think it's difficult or alien or just it's not something that we like to talk about, poetry. But I want to sort of reset that mindset because just like no one ever hears the same song, no one is ever going to read the same poem. And we all bring our own knowledge, our own life experiences to that reading of the poem, and that changes our interpretation. So really, as we're reading poetry, we should be less intimidated by it because in a way, there's no wrong reading of a poem. You read it, you try to decode the weird language, and you try to think about what your life experience is, how that might connect to the poem. And that's really the big thing we're going to talk about. So with this Big Six conversation, this new strategy we're trying, I want us to abandon the fear that you're going to read the poem wrong and embrace the conversation. So I know you're not here. If you're watching this video, you are not here in the classroom to have the conversation, but you are reading the same poem. You are still having that same experience. So share your thoughts, your feelings, and your beliefs in what limited you can, right, in this document that I'm going to give you. And that is how we will have these conversations. Don't be afraid of poems. You are adding your amazing life experiences to and beliefs and values and taking that poem and shaping it into something new. And that's beautiful in and of itself. All right, so let's look at this Big Six. Before we even start breaking down the Big Six, we are going to read the poem 2 times before talking about it. So read it once, read it again, and then we'll start the conversation. When we start the conversation, we're going to focus on the title, the speaker, the theme, the tools, the turns, and then we're going to paraphrase. So let's talk about each of those things in turn. Step 1, sorry y'all. Step 1, we're going to look at the title. And as we're looking at this title of the poem, we're going to think, what words or ideas appear in other places in the poem that are included in the poem's title? So, for example, if we have to follow the directions and we've read the poem 2 times before we started this conversation, then we know, okay, the title is mentioned 7 times throughout, and this is how. And we can sort of analyze why the author might have chosen to do it that way. Okay, is the poem's title a line in the poem? So that kind of goes here. That goes with the previous question. They go hand in hand. And then what does the poem's title highlight? So what about the poem's title is important? What does it make us think more about, maybe? Okay, then we look at the speaker. When we're reading a poem, we're going to identify the speaker and considering who is asking. So I want to take a second and really differentiate between we have an author and then we have a speaker. And sometimes those are the same person, and sometimes they're not. This is one of those things where you just sort of have to feel out. There's not a recipe that you can always be right, but you kind of just feel it out. It might just be There might be a narrator. It might be the author talking to you. And so you just sort of see what the poem is saying, and you can read it that way. Nonetheless, we are going to consider about our speaker. What is that person like? What do they love, hate, or fear? What is the speaker's attitude toward the subject? Now, these are things that are probably not going to be outright said in the poem, but we can use them to help us figure out. We can use the language that the poet uses to really feel what they're feeling and feel what they're thinking. It's very interesting when you look at it from this angle. So just try it. Okay, then we're going to look at theme. So our two big questions are, what are the big universal ideas addressed in the poem? And then how are they presented? So I want you to think about tone and imagery when we look at this. So how is the author showing us the theme? Is it through really vivid imagery? Is it through repetition and like figurative language? How is that author revealing the theme to the reader? Number 4, tools. This is where we get sort of step into English class a little bit. This is the first step where I'm actually asking you to step into the English classroom and say, all right, now what poetic devices or pieces of figurative language are being used? So if you see alliteration, if you see repetition, if you see simile, metaphor, allusion, all of those things, this is where you're going to mark that. And then you say, what tools repeat or create consistent image? So we're looking for repetition. What is the author using over and over again? What are the most powerful metaphors? These are the kinds of questions you should be asking yourself about the poem as you read. This is kind of the hard one. Step 5, turns. So we are going to look for the moment that there is a change in tone and or plot. So in most poems, I'm not going to say in all, but in most poems, there is a moment where something changes. There's either a shift in tone or the plot, like something sort of surprising happens and the plot changes. All of these things, this is what we're looking for, this moment when the game changes. That is the turn. And these are the two questions we're going to think about. Where are the spots that the poem turns or shifts, which I already sort of hinted on that one. And then what is the tone at the beginning of the poem and then the end? So look at the words, the tone that happens at the beginning and then the end, and then try to figure out where it changes in the middle and why, where and why it changes. All right, so finally we're going to paraphrase. This is when it comes to the story, right? So what actually happened? We're going to identify the plot of the story. So what are the most important events occurring in the plot? What are the big ideas, images? What is the story about? What happens? You could line by line or stanza by stanza just rewrite the poem. But really, I just need you to be able to say, all right, this poem is about a guy that goes to a garden and sees a pretty flower, and just like the very most basic explanation of what is the poem about. All right, now we're going to do an example, but I just wanted to really go over this big 6 idea and come back home to the screen. Remember, as we read poetry, we are going to think of it less about analysis and more about conversation. Every time we read, we're going to read the poem 2 times before talking about it. So 2 times before analyzing kicks in. And then we're going to look at the title, the speaker, the theme, the tools, the turns, and paraphrase. All right, so those are the tools that are going to help us become really good, strong readers of poetry. And it doesn't have to be scary. In fact, it can even be fun. All right, y'all, I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.